Hello, everyone. Welcome. The session today is basically going to be moderated by myself. I am super excited to host this particular session that's looking at both the idea of community arts practices, normally in COVID, and then what could potentially happen out of COVID, and also importantly, queer arts practices or queer arts. The conversation there is, like myself as a queer artist, I may not always do art. My work, my practice, I'm also a dancer beyond being the program manager for SAPAMO. In the context of that's just queer arts practices. And so we've assembled a wide array of artists working in community, queer artists also working in queer arts practices in communities to animate space with a conversation. Before we do, I'd like to make sure that I just read over and acknowledge the land that we're on and do a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to acknowledge the sacred land we work, create, and find breath. This land has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years and is the land on which I've danced, administered, and support the arts. This land is the traditional territory Takaranto, where the tree meets the water, the gathering place of many nations, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are grateful and thankful to have the opportunity to live, work, and play on this land. In extension, I want to call into focus and honor the indigenous lands of the Americas and the Caribbean. In particular, the Tainos of the land that nurtured my being and on which I arrived at birth, Jamaica, the land of wood and water, known as Jamaica. As we acknowledge systems of oppression on this land, and in this particular context, anti-Black racism, I'm mindful of the indigenous teachings and philosophies like the wampum belt and the dish with one spoon, aimed at bringing us through diverse understandings, conversations, and decision-making processes into a shared collective presence and opportunity. And herein lies the opportunity we have today to have this conversation, again, as I mentioned, with so many colleagues that I work with, those on the phone, those listening in, those able to think about how we animate space collectively together. I am severely, severely excited to have this conversation. And more importantly, I would like to set the stage by saying, again, with us at SAPAMO, we like to culturally instigate and culturally animate spaces in a different way. And probably that's why we have a name, Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement, Ontario. I know that because of many systems of Eurocentricity, we favor presentations and artistic practices happening in theater spaces. But we also don't favor what is very much a part of the IBPOC experience, which is creating and working with the context of an audience being the community. I want to broaden that, as I learned about 4 years ago, to not say community, because those are very monolithic things, as we might exist in many communities. And so this conversation is really about the communities in which we practice, create, and understand who we are as artists today. With that being said, we also have a protocol around how we want to animate and think about using this space as a respectful space to animate space and have a conversation. So we also invite you to think about the empathy and the sympathy that is required in this conversation, but also the openness. And here I will use a term from Liz Lerman, the Dance Exchange, which I have had the privilege of working with, to turn discomfort into inquiry. And hopefully by the end, that everyone will leave with a meaningful experience. Welcome. As we start this conversation, I would like to call on a dear colleague of mine to start the conversation, Tamla Matthews. And if you are so interested, you should have gotten bios. It's on SAPAMO's page if you are curious about Tamla's work. Each of the speakers will have about 10 minutes or less, it's your choice, to speak on how they engage with community, their artistic practice. And then we'll open it up for questions. We encourage you to send your questions and put it not in the chat, but send it directly to Charles Smith. Charles should wave right now. Let everybody know who you are, who will be administering the chat and responses. in the space of anonymity, we want to make sure that everyone who's sending a response is not called by their name, but simply by the questions or thoughts that they might have to put forward. All right, over to you, Tamla.
Hello, thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? If you can, give me a thumbs up. You know the dancer in me needs some kind of movement. Thank you. I am so excited, severely excited. I don't know how to beat that one, but I'm honored. I'm really, really honored to be a part of this conversation. And I'm excited that we're having these kinds of conversations right now. I'm not one to speak often about my work. And so this is a great opportunity. So thank you, Sapama, for the space to do that. And thank you, ancestors, for just allowing me to be alive in this moment, you know, to be able to breathe and share. I don't take that for granted. I'm aware of a lot of people who wish they were here right now and they're not. So I just want to give a moment for those people. But this is an incredible conversation, and the timing is incredible because I'm celebrating a 10-year anniversary with my children's company, Roots and Branches, in October. So I'm already in a reflective space. We're turning 10. And so I've been thinking a lot about my life in the last 10 years and what I've been doing. So an opportunity to talk about this has been amazing. So as Kevin alluded to, this idea of creating work in non-traditional, non-theater spaces now is a conversation topic, but for me was just a way of life. I come from a tradition of people who never rehearsed in theaters or studios. That was just not a part of how we lived. I grew up doing dance, cultural dance. So a little bit about myself. I'm a dancer, I'm an educator, I'm a mom. I don't want to use up my 10 minutes with that stuff. We'll get into that later. But how Kevin and I met was in a non-traditional dance space every Saturday in a group called a Scarborough Caribbean Youth Dance Ensemble that met in a school gym. And we had dance class for 4 hours a week. 4 hours from noon to 4. We had the men of the community would come and drum. The women would sing or make a lot of noise in the hallway. It was such a community experience up to the point where sometimes the parents are making more noise than the kids. We have to go out there and tell them to be quiet because we couldn't hear our music. So that's the kind of environment that now I reflect on as golden. When we were doing that, when we were hauling off to dance class every Saturday, me, mom, sisters, and you're looking at auntie so-and-so and you're bucking up with uncle so-and-so, and that sense of community and family that we grew up in now, when I reflect on, is amazing because that was our life. That was how we grew up doing the arts and experiencing the arts. So the fact that we're having a conversation about the fact that art happens outside of sort of theater spaces is in and of itself a real first world conversation. Because for me, it never happened in those spaces. Those were performative spaces. Those are spaces you went to perform or to show or prove that you had value or that you were just as important as some of the other things that were happening in those spaces. But for me, art and community are synonymous. I got called into a leadership role in my artistic life at a very, very young age. I started to dance with Scarborough Caribbean Youth Dance Ensemble at 12. And by 18, there was an opportunity to lead. I was 18. But the old people around me believed in me. So they said, okay, you could be an artistic director and we'll support you. So there I was, myself and Karen Donaldson, artistic directors at 18. I remember the Minister of Culture coming to our yearly production, because we would do a yearly production. People call it their season. We called it a production. And you know, they talked about the fact that we were so young and we were in those leadership capacities. But that was dance, that was art, that was community, that gave me those leadership opportunities. Later on, Kevin Ormsby and Louis McWilliams joined the team. And yes, I'm calling you out, Kevin. They joined the team. And we were a team of, now that you look back at it, intergenerational, multi-interdisciplinary artists. We didn't use those words back then. That was Louis, who had come up to do his master's at York. That was Tamla and Karen, interested in cultural dance and pursuing it. That was Kevin, fresh up from Jamaica with all of him, bringing the Jamaican flavor to the pot. That's how we grew up. That was our artistic experience. Every Saturday in this gym that we would sometimes have to clean before, you know, these weren't pristine spaces. These were spaces where families got together and got to know each other. And it became more than just the art. It really was the art of building community, now that we think back on it. The opportunity to grow with other families that had similar beliefs, the opportunity to stand with each other when hard times came, because those came too. We had incidences. I remember one particular incident. One of our drummers had been accosted in the mall, in Malvern Mall. Somebody pointed at him and accused him of doing something he didn't do. And as a community, we had to rally up and support around him at that time to say, no, we know him. He was at dance class. He was drumming. How could he have, we could vouch for him as a community and take those kinds of stances. Those are things that now I look back on and like marvel and kind of take for granted. But those are the kinds of things that art meant to us. It wasn't just something that you did to go perform in a studio at the end of the year. It was about how you lived, the people that would come to your birthday parties, the people that would be in your house, you know, people's parents. You know, seen Kevin Ormsby dance, but you never seen his dad dance, okay? How do I know that? Because his dad and my mom would be the last two ones up dancing when the party's done, everybody's done, and we're like, look at our parents, oh my gosh. Like, this is how we grew up. This is art for us, you know, his dad trying to outdance, my mom trying to show him, oh no, boo, this is how we do it. And they're going at it, you know, this is, we're talking about art. This is art. This was art. People coming in your house. You know what I mean? People knowing about what's happening in your life, celebrating with you, crying with you when we had those deaths, when we had those losses. So again, the conversation about art happening, not in studios, not in theater, of course, you know, for me, it happened in so many other spaces. And I'm so grateful now to look back at some of those experiences, because that is what kept me going. And that's what I wanted to create with Roots and Branches. When I started that company 10 years ago, when I had my own daughter, and I realized, wait a minute, I want her to have these experiences that I had. I want her to have the aunties, the dance aunties that come and do your makeup horribly, but do it with all their heart, you know, before you go out and dance. Or, you know, the auntie in the community would make the soup or bring little thing for the children to eat, you know, and they hustle it down to dance class to bring for the kids. Nobody didn't ask them. They're not getting an honorarium. They're not getting paid. They just had something to do and something to offer. So those are the spaces that I wanted to recreate when I had my daughter. And, you know, the community responded. So 10 years ago when I started Roots and Branches, we had 3 children on the first day. My daughter was 3, and she said, but Mommy, I thought you said the kids were coming to dance. I said, yeah, they're coming. She said, where are they? I said, they're on their way. First week, 2 came, it was like 3 of them. She's like, okay, Mommy, I thought you meant more than 3. She was 3 and had a lot to say. I was like, no, baby, they're gonna come. Those 2 told more. And, you know, every Saturday those kids came in, and it was building that. That was the motivation for me, was to let her have what I had growing up. And we were able to do that with Roots and Branches. We lived, I guess, at the Bernard Trail Community Center, again in the Malvern community. It was important to me to stay there because that was where my roots were. And I was keeping it about Malvern. I live in Ajax, but I'm Malvern till I die, right? My t-shirt here, more times differently still. I got a big up Shay on the more times differently still slang, you know, old school is how we do. Anyways, that was my motivation in terms of Roots and Branches, and really making sure that other Black families had that experience of coming to a place on a Saturday, meeting other families. You might get a chance to shake a little shack or learn a little something, because we pull the parents in too. You know, we might call the dads in to learn to drum. But those, again, were the spaces that I wanted to create, and I did with Roots and Branches. At our most, I think we had about 55 to 60 kids. And I was overwhelmed. I thought, okay, this is too much, because I missed knowing all of the families and knowing all of the kids. But as I reflect on that 10-year experience, I mean, it's again, another golden thing to reflect on and to think about how we create community through our arts. And yeah, the final thing I want to say is that I'm really excited. I'm excited about the future. One of the questions we had to answer in our time, and please let me know on time how I'm doing, because I can go on. But one of the questions was around how COVID-19 has affected us as artists. And I made a comment earlier, and I said, you know, we were at the Bernard Trail Community Center because we work out of that center on a special permit. And we've just been informed that we're not going to be getting a special permit this year due to COVID and other things. So for now, my program is kind of suspended. So my work as an artist around that part of my life will really be around reflecting and sort of pulling together that impact and using opportunities like this to talk about that work and how intentional those community pieces really are, and how it wasn't a mistake, some of the frameworks that I put in place. Now that I look back on it and I have better tools to assess what I was doing, I have a greater sense of what that was. So for me, my work as an artist is really galvanizing that knowledge and putting myself in a position where I can share, because those were really unique spaces that are still happening, because I believe SCYDE gave birth to Roots and Branches. Roots and Branches is giving birth to, D-Life and the rest of the other groups. They're going to give birth to, so art and community, that's how we flow. That's just how it is. But I would love to be able to galvanize and teach and learn more and just continue on the next phase, whatever that is. So I don't know time-wise how I did on that, but if there are other questions, Kevin, that you want to throw at me, or anyone else for that matter, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you for that. And you're highlighting a really interesting point about where different communities actually experience the arts differently, and how the idea that losing space is such an important thing when working community arts, because it then impacts the community and how they participate in the works that are present. At this point, thank you, Tamla. At this point, we open up the space for questions. And again, just to remind you, if you have any questions, please send them over to Charles C. Smith, and he will then read the questions out in the general forum. Charles, at this point, are there any questions?
No, I have one though, if you don't mind. So Tam, I'm really, the whole sense of community and the creativity, I wonder if you can talk about how, when the aunties, the uncles are there, how that inspires the children and the youth you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great question, or even a great thing to think about, because it's something that, again, now in my reflective mode, I'm realizing to have older people. So how SCYDE worked, we were a nonprofit organization, and we had a board of directors, and one of the activities was the dance group. And in that dance group, you had adults who weren't necessarily artists in that they had arts that they would practice, but they were art lovers and art supporters. It should also be noted that a lot of these people came from the Caribbean, where there wasn't this delineation between sort of artist and other. People had a love for all things. You may not play a pan, but you go to the panyard. You're really interested in the calypsos of the day and what they're saying. Like they're sort of people that are in and of the culture. And so we had a lot of aunties and uncles that were like that. And so their encouragement of myself as a young artist was golden, because they were real consumers of the art as well. So when they say, oh, that dance is good, or that I'm looking right. For me, those things were incredible moments of validation. So because my work is very much in a Caribbean aesthetic, it was important to me that my work looked and felt authentic and could resonate with people from the Caribbean. As a Canadian-born Trini, it was important to me to have that authenticity. So when they would weigh in on my work or feedback or sing in the songs for some of my choreographies or offer rhythms that I could use in some of my, I thought those things were amazing. And those were things that helped me grow as an artist. And also as someone who was producing art, and I wanted it to be consumed, and I wanted it to be consumed and received in the right way. So they were invaluable in offering that kind of support. Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have another one for you just to lean in a little bit more for this. So you mentioned some interesting things here around how different racialized or communities actually engage in community arts practices differently. You mentioned also the idea of the intergenerational play that was happening in those particular moments and spaces. How do you now, given what you now know, are thinking about continuing to build a community of practice, given that you don't no longer have a space, this quote unquote upcoming season or year, and knowing that the community was also in need of this sort of animation through the arts? Have you given thoughts to that?
Yeah, that's thinking all parts of those things. For me, it's really to do like what I said before, like really elevate myself, galvanize my knowledge and my experience, and teach others and plant those seeds, and really identify what the success factors are. We know what works, in terms of engagement of communities, in terms of even breeding the next level of artists. We know what works. So for me, it would be to continue my community of practice by widening what that community is. I think one of the gifts of COVID, dare I say, one of the gifts of COVID was just forcing me into a virtual world that, you know, I was kind of kicking and screaming to not be a part of. And I was definitely that person, but it's forced me in. And so I think that's another way that I will be widening that community, is just being more virtually available. I have a sort of love-hate relationship. So that's one way that I plan to. And just to keep seeking, I think just connections with people are magical and transformative. I think the right conversation with the right person just like sparks an idea, like, oh, why did I think of that? And, you know, so I'm just being open to all parts of what my community of practice can be, because I'm even assessing what is my community of practice. Like, you know, as a dancer that doesn't dance that often, like, you know, those are things that I'm playing around with. So thank you for giving me more to think about, Mr. Ormsby.
Thank you very much, and thank you for contributing and sharing as well, given our long histories together. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple of questions that have come in. So Tamla, what are your thoughts on bridging the gap between this type of community and arts practices into sustainable work and realities of arts as a career in more formal institutions?
I think you have to be responsive to what's happening in the community. I think you have to be in spaces that support that kind of courage, that encourage that. I think you have to be an artist that wants to say something. And that was one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this talk, is that I always felt I needed to say something. And so that motivated me to do many of the things that I did. And so I think people have to want to say something or do something. That has to be the motivating factor, and that alone will force space to be made. You'll say the things that you need to say. You'll get into those spaces and shake it up. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but I'm suggesting that's what the process has to be.
I have another question. If you're working with Indigenous folks, and if so, how do you reach out to them?
I've tried in the past in other work that I've done. I'm open and welcome all opportunities, but it's not a community that I'm currently working a whole lot with, but I'd love to.
Yeah. Those are the questions.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to also now introduce Newton Moraes. Newton Moraes runs a contemporary Brazilian dance company. He's also a queer identified artist, and more importantly, through his community classes, have been galvanizing the Brazilian community around dances, primarily of the Orishas, as he is also ordained into the Orishas. There are many intersections here around how community work influences practice, but also how diversity in culture and ethnicity can be looked at differently in different communities. And so I want to invite Newton Moraes to have a conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. I would like to say, first of all, thank you to you, to Charles and Sipam for the opportunity, and also to meet very interesting creative artists from different art forms. And yeah, well, as you mentioned before, I was born and raised in Brazil, and like Tamia was saying, community plays a big role on myself as a Brazilian. And growing up a Catholic man as a gay man was kind of very controversial and very crazy. And eventually I found my niche and my soul Afro-Brazilian realm with the Orishas, and that actually helped me to become a better human being. And, you know, through events related with the spirituality and also dance. But when I was living in Brazil, I was not yet considered as a professional artist. There I was able to meet my partner, who was an incredible man. He was an anthropologist, and his name is Robert Shirley, and he was a Brazilianist. And he brought me eventually to Canada. I was at the time I couldn't speak any English at all. I was afraid going to a different culture, exploring different viewpoints and so on. But he says, you're going to be just as fine. And And then I start engaging to dance professionally at Toronto Dance Theatre. And in 1997, I founded my dance company, Moraes Dance Theatre, that our first performance was in Germany, in Stuttgart. And then that's when things start going more, and I start thinking about more as an artist myself. And then I became engaged with Ballet Crioulo. That's one of the amazing local dance companies from Toronto, with Patrick Parson. I was engaged as well with Bakari, with Koba, Collective of Black Artists. Lately, for the last several years, I have been very engaged, involved as well with Kevin Ormsby and Cachet Dance. So I am a man with many hats. I also teach in the community. I study at York University. I was doing my master's in choreography. Currently I teach also at Humber College at the theater department. And I was teaching all these years. I've been teaching dance as a community art form. So people from different walks of life, and they have different expectations what they want to do with their dance form. And it was incredible. So people from many different cultures, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me as a choreographer, as an artist, to share and dialogue with people from many different walks of life. Currently, I was teaching before COVID. I was teaching at a beautiful space called the Dark Side Studio in Toronto on Kensington Market. And as you all know, unfortunately, that space also was forced to close because 5 months without having any revenues, they were forced to close. Of course, when COVID started, and I would like to also mention that I'm deeply sorry what's happening in the United States and also in Brazil and currently in India too. As a Brazilian, I am devastated by my president and how ignorant he is. And he's forcing many people to think wrongly that COVID is just a little flu or a little cold, as he says. So I'm deeply sorry about that. And I am sad that many people have passed related to this. I hope and wish that somehow the government and scientists and so on are going to find ways for us to get rid of this and find vaccination and also take ourselves as human beings taking care of ourselves. But as a stranger it might be, actually COVID, I'm very busy as an artist in COVID. I can't believe it. On the beginning, I was not doing much at all. And then just a few of my friends, they asked, why don't you teach online? So I started teaching online, and was a great opportunity. Then became something that never I could thought that could happen. So I was having eventually friends and students from Brazil, from Germany, from Mexico, from Colombia, from the United States, from Canada, and from Germany, taking my classes that, of course, if I travel to those countries and I was leading a master class or some kind of community class, they would be able to take my class. But since that we have COVID now, and also people have access to either their telephone or their laptop and they can connect to Zoom, they are able to connect with you. And I find that there is some very positive aspect with COVID, is because I live in a bubble, because Toronto is such a incredible city, but people living in small communities, they barely ever have access to culture. So now they have access to culture to the Zoom. I think it's a fascinating opportunity to many artists. And I think that hopefully when COVID ends, I think that's going to be one of my goals, to also continually having my class online and also have my laptop connected, and people can be whatever, in Brazil, somewhere in Africa, somewhere in Japan, and they can be involved with what we are doing. And of course, doing live performance. Another thing that I have been doing and is being fascinating, I was invited by artists from Montreal. They're visual artists and choreographers and filmmakers, and it's called Together Apart. So each artist have 19 seconds to create something. And so I feel very thankful to that. And the organizers are Sonia Stefan and Sarah Williams. Sarah Williams used to dance with La 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 Human Steps. And Sonia Stefan used to dance with Toronto Dance Theatre. She was a founder member of Newton Moraes Dance Theatre. At the moment as well, I'm creating some performance that's going to be live stream performance, but because officially it's part of a festival, so I'm not supposed to say, I'm not supposed to say the name of the festival, but we are going to be performing. Also being commissioned by Kathleen Reyes, a very well-known artist in Toronto. She is dancing ballet with National Ballet and Ballet Organ. So we are starting rehearsals. And another amazing thing that I was involved in, that's a small community, of course, in Toronto, but still is a big city, is Saskatoon. My good friend Jackie Latendresse, who runs Free Flow Dance Theater, she invited myself and several other artists, including Alan Keja, to participate in brain-body connection workshops. So we're having 2 days workshops teaching hair dances and dances from all over Canada and Brazil and other parts that they were engaged and interested in participating in that. So of course, we have a lot of people who passed away. Some people are confined in little space. Some people are very afraid of going out. But I think there is some also opportunity for us as creators, as artists, to explore this time as a way to connect with the world more than ever. And another thing I would like to mention is that our company has been turning almost 23 years old. And we had some major events that we were planning to do this year, and they have somehow been postponed, that they were none of them being canceled. So I feel happy about that. I don't know if there is anything else I would like to share.
Thank you, Newton. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple of questions. So which Orisha in particular, Newton, that you're the priest of, and how the characteristics of that Orisha influence your work?
My Orisha is Elegua. In Brazil we call Bará, and his color is red. So you can see my sofa, red is my favorite color, and also is the color of Canada. So I embrace my heritage culture with the green, and I embrace my new culture that accepts me as Canadian culture, and also the color of my Orisha. So is the Orisha that he has the key, so he opens the door. So is the first Orisha of all the deities in the African realm, and yeah, so that's it.
I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but I wonder, Newton, if you could talk about the intersections between, you mentioned the troubles in Brazil and how that affects your work here.
Yeah, it's a very turbulent time. I don't know if all of you are familiar with not just the number of deaths that are happening in Brazil, but we have a ultra-conservative government at the moment. And all the money some money that was going towards the arts is no longer there. So artists are struggling. Only, of course, if you come from a very established family that somehow, or companies that they are kind of top, they would survive. So I hope and wish that soon that man, I even refuse to say his name, that I hope that eventually he's going to be kicked out on the curb.
Okay, I have another question. Not related to that one. And this might be relating to all the panelists, so we'll think about this as you go around, is how are you monetizing your efforts, particularly during this time through Zoom, to create sustainable practice? I think Tamla answered that a bit. So Newton, how are you managing this?
Well, the beginning was very hard because it's a kind of a new technology that I was trying to use it, and then friends who were trying to tell me how to use, how to share the music and so on. And also when I was teaching, I remember the first time when I was teaching, I said, this is so weird, because I know that the people are there, but it's different. But I remember 20 minutes or so after myself started teaching, I felt this incredible energy, how I always felt when I was teaching the class and I have Walter McLean or Hudson playing the drumming, and there were two of the most fabulous drummers in the city, in the country, I believe. And so then all my passion, my energy, and I also felt this incredible energy from all the people involved. So it takes some time, but I think, of course, the ideal scenario would be connecting with all of you right now, face to face in the room, and we're sitting in a round circle, yeah? But this is maybe the second best opportunity, but still we are able to communicate and to share.
Yeah. We have another question. I'm just going to read it. We hear a lot about the African diaspora in North America and the Caribbean. Could you maybe talk about that in the Brazilian space arts experience? The person suggesting that Brazil, to his knowledge, has the largest population of Black people of African descent outside of Africa.
Correct. It is. It is. Well, if you are somehow below to the spirituality, even if, for example, I don't have a melanin as a Black person, but I'm accepted by the culture. And there are a lot of people in the population in Brazil who are engaged with African diaspora. And I cannot deny, because some of the most fascinating art forms and like film industry, like music, is produced by the African diaspora in Brazil. But like in the United States and lesser in Canada, we still have a huge problem with racism. And there is not equal opportunity for the Black population as the white population. If you see on the TV broadcast, most of the broadcasts are all white men, you know? So but we see as well in sports, like in soccer, most of the soccer players are Black men, you know, and many of the sports. But I think we don't have a weak opportunity in Brazil as we have here. The police is also vicious too. Yeah. So, I mean, we have a long way to go. And I thought that when we had the PT, the party that was leading the country, and we have a more liberal government, I think Brazil was going forward. And my partner, because he has deep knowledge about Brazil as an anthropologist, says, Newton, finally, the giant awakened. So it's Brazil, yeah. But now I think the giant is in coma.
Thank you. Is there any more questions, Charles? Thank you so much, Newton. Let's get the giant out of coma. You've mentioned so much beautiful things that intersects with where I will go next, which is the idea around varieties of ethnicities and cultures working and participating in the arts and working in their own ways of animating space in the ways that they know how. And with this in mind, I want to also bring in Tom Truss to talk about the varieties of ways in which he's also been intersecting with community, but also with his artistic practice from his particular experience. This is going to be interesting because it's the first time we're actually having a sort of co-facilitated conversation with two speakers being in the same space together. And I am envious that they're actually in a studio space together. Matthew Cumbie is also in that particular space, and Matthew and I worked together at the Dance Exchange as well as Tom did prior to me being there. So I want to invite Tom to just have a conversation around how his work, his practice intersects with the arts from what is also a very queer narrative and perspective.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me in, Kevin. And it's like everyone else has said so far, and probably everyone is experiencing, it's a real treat. Yeah, to be with these people, and to be with someone live. It's pretty amazing. So my background is words and movement, and I, like Kevin said, was a part of the Dance Exchange. And one of my practices is investigating a subject through movement. So I'm going to do that now as we talk, and I'm going to invite you to respond to that any way you want, whether you just move your fingers or not move at all. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I think we are often engaged with screens, and I'm getting a little tired of it. And so it's a way to not have to be connected to the screen and to reference back to our body, because that's what we've got. So here I go. Let's see. So yeah, I was talking about research. So one of the things that I like to do is to understand a subject and to figure out where it lives in my body and to allow my body to inform the subject in the investigation. And oftentimes I do it through like movement metaphor. So for instance, I was just there and my hand was over my face, over my eyes, and just like, what is that about right now? What don't I want to see? And, or what sort of comfort am I getting, right? And for me, it's actually really nice to not look at anything. It's one of my stronger senses, my eyes. And so to not have it there puts me in a different place in my body, and it wakes up other proprioceptors, like me dropping my weight down, which I noticed before. My weight was, I wasn't even noticing where it was, and with my eyes closed, my weight's dropping down. So yeah, you get to keep moving if you want or not. I'm going to. So don't feel like you have to either. I am a performer and I'm a teacher, so artist educator. And I don't like not having people around. I'm an extrovert. And so when this happened, I just said, screw it. I'm going to boycott screens. I'm not going to take classes online. I'm not going to watch shows that are online. I'm not going to look at a dance that is not about being online, that it was just an archival sort of footage. I'm a fan of taking the medium of film and putting it with whatever art you're working with. I'm not a fan of your art just having the film being put on it to watch. So I was a part of one play where we were, I don't know, 20 of us were in a Zoom and we were doing the play, and there was something sort of sweet about it, but it was also so unsatisfying. So I think as performing artists, we need to actually accept that the main ingredient that makes who we are is somebody alive and watching us. And so to have that 3D response is just not possible for me. It can be for other people, but it's not possible for me. So I have stayed away from screens. With that, you know, turn discomfort into inquiry, right? Kevin, what you said. And so I'm like, okay, here's this thing that I don't want to enter into, but I want to continue using my words and connecting with people. And I have, in the back of my head, had wanted to do a show called Ask Your Gay Uncle. And I didn't quite know how it was going to come about, but really it was just going to be like an advice thing. And so just at this time, there was a radio station. I live in a very rural area. Not a lot of people, about 7,500 people in my town, not a lot of queers. So my connection to the queer community is pretty small because the community is really small. So I wanted to find a way to ignite my queerness and to connect with other people. And so when this radio station, public radio station came along and they're like, hey, we're looking for people to do shows, I thought, oh, I'm gonna do a call-in radio show called Ask Your Gay Uncle. But what happened is they didn't quite get their shit together, and you know, it's public radio, and then COVID came along and they didn't have the ability in which to vet the phone calls. So then I was talking to my nephew, who is a gay boy, and I said, why don't you do this show with me? And then one of us said, let's make it a podcast. And so we have created a podcast called Ask Your Gay Uncle. You can find it on any place where you get your podcasts. And it's turned into a weekly episode. And it's a way that I am connecting with community, and it's a listener-driven show. So people will write in and give us questions, and then we'll respond to it. And then Ben, my nephew, and I will ask each other questions, and then we have some goofy games. And it's about 45 minutes, 55 minutes long, and we are on episode 12 now, and we've got 10,000 downloads. And it's turned into this amazing thing where I had no idea this was going to happen. And I think a part of it is about that skill, I'm an improviser and you know, creator, and that idea of creative problem solving. And so I've been trained in that. And a part of it is just saying yes and. And so this came along and I said yes, and then Ben said yes, and then we said a few more yeses, and here we are. So that is one of the things that's feeding me, and it's giving me that connection to community, and it's giving me a connection to my nephew that I've never had, such a beautiful, deep love that we have created. And that art part of me is getting met, because we edit the shit out of this radio show. You know, it is like, we spend hours on it, and it's good. So that is feeding that part of my body. So another thing is, I work at a studio, this one, and there are two other studios. It's called Pulse. And like most people, COVID came and it was shut down. And I live in a rural area where there are some really big houses that were like people of 100 years ago, mansions that are now museums, and their life shut down as well. And so it's like shutting down, shutting down, shutting down, shutting down. And then how do we connect and how do we support each other? And so we here at Pulse turned to them and said, you have big open fields, and our studios can't hold the number of people we want to have. So can we have our classes in your big open fields? And they said yes. So that was a way for them to get people in, and that was a way for us to not worry about having to wear a mask while dancing. And like going across the floor is now like going across 3 acres. You know, it just is. The possibility is huge. And one of the things that normally happens, and I think it happens for a lot of artists, is during the summer, there's a festival or there's a big school, that's the word, a big school. And so our school, of course, was now going to be shut down. So we then said, how can we have the school there, and how can I honor my need to make art that is not viewed from a screen where that's not the purpose? And so I decided to do a site-specific choreography class for film. And so these kids brought their iPhones, and we created solos and we created duets in this amazing house, and we're in the process of editing it all together. So that's one of the ways that we have solved the problem of how do we get people in here and not have them dance like this tiny. One of the ways that we're thinking about doing that is with our gala, you know, fundraising. Somebody talked about monetization. So we're going to do our gala online, and each class is going to create their own piece, and that's going to be viewed in a public gallery that people can go to whenever they want, but there'll be some sort of fee in it. Another thing that with the podcast, askyourgayuncle.com, you can go there whenever you want. Ask Your Gay Uncle, we're going to put in a donate button, see if people want to donate. And if we've got 10,000 people and people put in $2, I'm okay with that. That'll help me. The other thing is, like Newton, I went online, I started doing classes, and I offered them as a free class, and if you want to donate, you can, and I did that through Venmo and PayPal, and I actually did pretty good with that. And then the weather changed, and everybody went outside and didn't need to do a dance class in a cramped place. And I stopped teaching that class, and then I got depressed because I wasn't moving. And being an extrovert, I was like in my apartment by myself, and doing work with Ben, the podcast. But I would say it was hard, like for everyone, I'm sure. And I have another project going on with Matthew, and that's a long arc project, like a 2-year project. And we're we're at the end of our 1-year mark, and we just had to do a whole revamping of how to do this. And some of it actually was quite good because our collaborators are down in Texas and in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh and up here and up in Maine. And so we could Zoom, and it was like we didn't have to pay for travel. So there are some things that have been, you know, those gifts of COVID. That's been one of them. I would say I'm writing more grants. And I'm searching for more grants. That was less of what I did. I am also doing that whole unemployment thing and figuring out how to do unemployment. And that's one of the ways in which I'm trying to keep my pockets filled as a gig artist worker. So that's what I'll share for now.
Thank you, Tom. Is there any questions?
Just looking at the moment.
While you do, I have one for you, Tom. You mentioned this idea of creative problem solving and involving community. And I just have a question around, could you talk some more about how much of the amazing thing that came out of the being in COVID was actually something you thought about before as a strategy of engaging community, of work, of thinking about these homes and these fields and these acres? How much of that was a strategy you thought about as an artist prior to COVID?
None. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't. I mean, I do site-specific work, definitely. It was from a while ago, and like one of the things I did with the Dance Exchange was create a site-specific piece through the Kennedy Center, and I've done that a few times, but I haven't done it up here where I live. You know, I have a little bit, but not to the degree of this needs to be my bread maker, and here's an opportunity, and do it. Before it was, here are my 5 things that are in front of me, and one of them happens to be site-specific work. And now it's, that's what it is, make site-specific work. Yeah, so it was there in the past, but now it's there in the forefront.
Thank you. So the situations and the time definitely would seem opened up more possibilities for your creative art making and thinking about it in so many beautiful ways that you've mentioned. I'm making notes and I'm just going, wow, because I feel you're also talking about the sense of awareness that you got from this particular moment that is now allowing you to think differently about the potentials of working, not only as an artist, but the ways in which you also are animating and thinking about community as part of that particular work or animation as well.
Yeah, I would add to that, Kevin, is because I've been isolated, I've had more time to think, and there's been less things to do. And so I've been pickier. And I think before I was less picky. It was just like, you know, oh, I could do that, I can do that, I can do that. You know, it's like the candy shop. It's like, I'm going to keep eating all this good art. And now that the art's not there, I'm in this place of, oh, okay, out of those 4 things, what do I really want to do? Because it's got to meet a lot of my needs. And it's sort of converse. Like I would think, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, but neither does this time period. So I think it's been an outcome that I, for some reason, have become more, like I said, pickier, discriminating about which ones I choose.
Thank you for that. Is there any questions, Charles? No? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. Calling to the screen, Matthew.
Hold on, one question I think.
One question.
The question here is, Matthew, do you struggle with your queerness being used as tokenism or quantitative value? Interesting question.
I'm not talking, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think if anything, I claim it. I claim it so I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that. You know, it's a part of many ingredients of who I am. I don't think it's on the forefront, but then it's on the forefront. And then it's, like I'm a human first. I'm a human first. That's where I am. I'm a human first. And then I'm a queer. And then I'm a man. And maybe actually before being a queer and a man, I'm an artist and a creator. So I would go human, artist, creator, queer boy, man. And even the man is like, I'm a thing. So if there has been tokenism, I haven't felt it.
There's one other question. So when engaging your students, Matthew, in community and teaching through movement, have there been specific feedback that shaped your practice a little more?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. When engaging your students and community and teaching, have there been specific feedback from those that shaped your practice a little more? So in essence, what are you getting back from the people you're teaching?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two answers to that. There's pre-COVID and post-COVID. Post-COVID, it's how many people are in the Zoom class. You know, I mean, I think it's so often around numbers, right? If like the numbers are dwindling, then it's like, I need to change something, whether it's what I'm doing or it's just the time. But yes, I would say some of them have been, you talk too much. Let me experience more of what's going on. You don't need to fill the space. I think that's probably the biggest one for me.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tom. Matthew.
Hi, y'all. Should I just dive in, Kevin, or is there anything to say before I'm prepared?
No, go right in. You can. I know you very well, so I know you'll see a lot, and I know you'll be a great connector among many of the things that have already been said. So, right ahead.
I appreciate your faith in me, and I just want to again, like everybody else, thank you and Charles and the rest of CPAMO for organizing this conversation. It's been really rich so far, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be calling in from a studio, like you mentioned, from a studio where I'm in collaboration with a real life human being. And I'll talk more about that later. I do want to acknowledge that we are calling in from a place that this country recognizes as Western Massachusetts. We are not in Canada. Also on the ancestral lands of the, and I have this written down, so I'm just going to look at my notes, because I'm not from here, the Mohicans and the Nipmuc and Pocumtuck. So acknowledging their roots and stewardship of this place long before we got here. I actually live in Washington, D.C., or what we consider Washington, D.C., and I'm here on a creative residency for this project that I'll again talk about in just a moment. I do want to kind of start by calling in something that someone else earlier said. I think it's a few things that were said earlier that really struck me. One, and this is from Tamla, talking about your, and I'm going to change my to gallery view. I prefer seeing lots of faces. Hi. Earlier, Tamla spoke to her growing up in this distinction between kind of art and community being very different, and kind of more nuanced, maybe not even a distinction, some kind of a nimbleness of moving through these ways of being in practice and being in community, and that really struck me because that was not my experience growing up. I grew up, and I say this because I think it's important to kind of frame my own artistic journey to where I'm at now and what I'm interested in. I grew up in near the Gulf of Mexico in what we consider Texas, outside of Houston, to a very conservative family, a very loving family, but very conservative, very white. And because of a lot of reasons, I felt really different as a young person. And I think that difference was really tied to what I came to know as my sexuality or sexual orientation and identity. But I think it also really connected me to a curiosity about art making. Tamla also said, and this was in response to a question that was asked around kind of artistic training, you have to want to say something and do something. I would also like to add, you have to want to know something, because I think that's what really drew me to my own art making, wanting to know more about myself in relationship to the world around me, and wanting to know more about people and places that I saw myself in and deeply connected to. As a young person, a lot of my life felt really almost kind of fragmented, very isolated at times. Monday nights I would go to the Cub Scouts. On Tuesday nights I would go to my soccer class. During the days I'd go to my math class and my science class and my English class. And we never really spoke about the relationship between all of those things. It was very particular, very organized. And what has become, I think that set me up for a lot of questioning as I got older. And this feeling of isolation that Tommy mentioned, kind of living here, that was something that I deeply experienced growing up. I did not see myself in a lot of the places and spaces and people that I was surrounded by outside of my family. So I tried my hand at a lot of different things, and what ended up happening, I found my way eventually into an artistic space, more rooted in music, but that eventually led me to something that was more movement-based, and I'll never forget the kind of first audition I went to. It was an experience, and it certainly left a mark. But the thing that I remember leaving, it was for a job that I did not get, but one of the things that happened in that moment, it was a transformative moment for me, because I remember leaving the audition feeling more alive, feeling more connected to my body, feeling more connected to the world around me because of that. And I grew really hungry to kind of follow that path and to learn more about what it was about dance and movement that did that. And that took me on a journey through lots of things. I'll skip over that. I think one of the kind of really important landmarks on that was my time at the Dance Exchange that Kevin mentioned, which is where we met, and which is, I think, one of the few, or one of the many things, I should say, that brought Tommy and I together in our collaborative work because of that shared history. The Dance Exchange is an intergenerational dance organization founded by Liz Lerman, based outside of Washington, D.C., that really holds an equal commitment to kind of really rigorous dance making and training, and also kind of deeply rooted community engagement. And that was I was with the company for about 8 years, working as a resident artist and then as an associate artistic director. And that really shaped and reshaped and undergirded a lot of the work that I now do in my time there. And I think one of the kind of really provocative things that expanded or really kind of, it really changed how I saw art making was the commitment to intergenerational collaboration and exchange. Working with people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities I'd experienced in different ways, but again, like what we call things, I think is really interesting and can either amplify or close off how we see something. And so calling it that really brought my focus into it in a different way. And through my time with the organization, one of the things that really crystallized for me was this relationship between my art making and my queerness. And I started to, and I think one of the kind of catalyzing moments for that was because it came from, around the time I joined the company was also around the time that in this country, there were lots of big conversations and movements around what we call marriage equality. And so really looking at like the quote unquote rights that we can legalize or not for certain people in this country. And I remember having this experience of being in New York City when they passed their own state marriage legislation, marriage equality legislation. And I was with a former lover. He was very animated and very excited because of the decision that happened. And we went out to celebrate. And I remember sitting in this bar and looking out at all these people that were experiencing something. And I did not feel that, which struck me as odd. And so I decided to like follow that curiosity and unpack that a little bit. And what came what I came to know was that I did not know enough about my communities. I did not know enough about the people and places that had shaped our history, that had shaped my body in a way. And so I didn't feel like I had access to that. And kind of in partnership with my time at Dance Exchange, I also started to come to realize the importance of intergenerational collaboration and exchange, particularly when you are wanting a kind of a portal or a way in to look at history, to understand history, to put yourself in relationship to it in a different way. And so since then, a lot of the work that I've been doing has really been around kind of looking at and exploring history making and history telling through an embodied approach, but really looking at it also through my own queer identity and within the communities that I'm a part of, and using that as an opportunity to, for myself at least, reframe or revision what we are experiencing currently in terms of being a part of an LGBTQ plus community, and how can a creative process help catalyze more intergenerational conversation, collaboration, exchange within queer folks, because what I found is that those spaces are often few and far between. So I started making a lot of work about that, and it led me to some really deep and meaningful partnerships and relationships with people in the place that I was living. So it really became specific to Washington, D.C. early on, which also changed my relationship to the place I lived, because I saw myself in relationship to these histories. I also saw myself more a part of the community, and therefore I felt more moved to take action and to participate in my community, which was not necessarily how I felt when I first moved there. And since then, it's been a really wonderful, interesting, exciting, challenging journey of continuing to lean into those relationships and find new ways to engage. And just before, about a year ago, a couple things that really felt exciting and important to me. I stepped away from my relationship with the Dance Exchange. It changed and transformed, as things do over time, to really set out on my own and lean into this space where I can really focus on and emphasize working with LGBTQ folks. And as part of that, I started working with Tommy on this project that is looking at these two American authors from 170 years ago that up until a year ago, I didn't know too much about. Certainly didn't know that there's a lot of speculation about their intimate relationship that they had. And then also doing a lot of work with the LGBTQ affirming healthcare facility in Washington, D.C., the Whitman Walker Healthcare, leading weekly classes for patients and staff, and especially folks that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think to respond to the question I think that Charles asked a moment ago too, in terms of like, how are you sustaining and what has changed, what has happened since COVID, I think a lot of what's been said really resonates. You know, the sense of widening and expanding how we engage and how we think about connecting and what that looks like, what that can look like. Tommy and I are having a works in progress showing this evening, and it's virtual. So we're actually able to bring about 80 something people onto a Zoom call tonight from really all over the world. I think most folks are calling in from the United States, or what we know of as the United States, but I know there are a few emails that seem like they're coming from other parts of the planet, which is exciting and wouldn't have happened otherwise. But the other thing that I think I really want to make sure to call into the conversation is the loss that we've experienced because of this pandemic. And in particular, I think about going back to this sense of isolation, at least in the United States, as people depending on where you live, can really create a sense of isolation. And also, ours is a society that likes, again, to kind of separate and organize and isolate based on the most common denominator. And so oftentimes older adults in this country are kind of sequestered, and there's a lot of isolation that one can experience because of that. And then again, and I think back to also my experience as a young person, the sense of being cut off and disconnected because I didn't have an opportunity to connect with other people like me. So certainly isolation. And then I think a lot about accessibility to a collaborator and friend of mine who just turned 80 does not have the internet. And so in this time where we're all, I think, looking to the internet to find those ways and those pathways and portals out of our home and into other people's lives and in a social space, he doesn't have that. And really trying to think about how do we continue to keep in mind those people that might not have the same kind of accessibility, and to do that with a sense of care, because we are still in a pandemic, and it is impacting people's lives in different ways. And that's something that I am trying to figure out, and certainly my partner and I have made some decisions for that one specific instance, but it's something that I'm still really grappling with, and I don't necessarily know that I've got the answers I want.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions?
Yes, there's one here. It's actually in two parts, and then there's a comment. So the first part, I'll read the question and break it into. How do you feel, and this is actually to all the panelists, so all the panelists, you might want to think of this as as part of your comments. How do you feel about the current opportunities for inclusion and diversity in funding opportunities? That's part A. And then can you talk about guidelines and adjudication, how they might be reimagined for ethical allocation and access to creating work at a professional level in the funding models?
Oh, that's interesting.
I thought so too.
Yeah. Charles, can you read the first part of the question again, please?
Sure. How do you feel about the current opportunities for inclusion and diversity in funding opportunities?
Great. Thank you. How do I feel? I feel like I feel that, at least in terms of funding opportunities within the United States, and I'm thinking specifically because I think particularly when we're talking about issues of inclusivity, diversity, equity, community, it's important to be specific. I think when we start to telescope out and talk more broadly, it can potentially be damaging or hurtful or harmful. And so from my part, at least, I try to be as specific as possible. So in my response, I'm thinking a lot about grant structures. I do a lot of grant writing and looking at that both as for my own work and practice, but also as a separate thing that I do for other people to try to sustain myself in this moment. So I do think that there are certainly there are more conversations I feel happening around inclusivity, diversity, and equity. And for those parts, I feel like that's a step in the right direction. Is it doing enough? I do not believe it is. And I think that particularly the word diversity, I really start to question what we mean. It feels like a kind of hot topic, a buzzword. And so when I read that, I have lots of questions come up around what we mean. And again, it goes back to that specificity. So I don't necessarily think that enough work is happening around that, or that people have necessarily, I think people have latched on to the idea, but I question if there has been the internal work necessary to support or undergird the work that they really want to be doing or supporting, or at least what they say and what they give lip service to. I think the thing that, one thing that I feel like I have noticed some movement happening in terms of funding structures, and I think I'm really excited by this. Again, and I have lots of questions about what this means for the field more largely, but I do feel that more and more people are looking at more local ways, like how to funnel support and funding to people in their own communities. And that really excites me. I think that particularly when we're talking about creating any sort of sustainable change in and with the communities that we're a part of, that work needs to happen. It needs to happen at all parts of the ecosystem, but certainly a lot of that work needs to happen at a local level. And I don't think that was necessarily always the understanding or case. But when you talk to community organizers, you know, it's all about lots of small, localized actions that then really kind of build momentum and gather the speed and galvanize the people to move that work forward in more sustainable ways. Okay.
The other part of that, and it does tie in to what you're saying, is reimagining adjudication, juries, for ethical allocation and access to creating work at a professional level. So I imagine there's some tie-in in terms of the challenge, you say, around funding and who is making these decisions.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that my immediate response is to drop into a specific example. I'm thinking about a grant opportunity that we're applying for today. The deadline is today, and one of the questions that's on this application is acknowledging that the people that are looking at this application might have different understandings of what success looks like. And so they're asking us to define what success looks like, which I really appreciate that question. And it's a really hard question, especially when you're working within a certain, you know, like a lot of funding structures, they ask for your answers to be really short and concise and to fit within a word or character limit. And yeah, so I hope this answers your question. I feel like more people need to be asking what artists mean when they use certain words, because I think language is a construct. We've made this up, and the meaning we associate with it is really dependent on where we come from, who we are, the experiences that we have and bring to that understanding. I mean, even in our collaboration, we're recognizing that we call things differently all the time. And so it's led to some really interesting conversations. It's, they've not always been easy, but by leaning into that discomfort and having the conversation, it's also, I would argue, moved our work forward. It's brought us closer in our relationship, and it's helped us continue to kind of build the shared understanding of what we actually want this to do and look like.
Thank you. I imagine that question we'll ask to some other speakers as well as we go along.
Thank you so much, Matthew. You mentioned so much beautiful, rich things there. You know, connecting with Tom around the idea of space and what it means to just take some time to find that particular space where one exists. It's really interesting, and to make some connections and to support what you're saying also about granting and funding. Around, you mentioned the community needs to see themselves in their art making. And I think that's probably very much true or stands true in the context of grant applications. That if a community-based artist does not see themselves reflected in a grant application, then where do those applications actually arrive to find meaning? And how is that meaning then understood contextually when somebody adjudicates it? If it involves primarily work in a very professional way in a community space, that might not be considered professional because it doesn't arrive in the spaces that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that is in a theater space. And so what is some of those particular sort of problematics that exist in that? So thank you for that. The history making is also very interesting because it's also past, present, and future. And I really appreciate that because I think once you arrive in communities, the history making is being made in those particular moments, and it requires for you to be reflexive as a queer artist or as a community artist or with a queer practice or a community engaged practice. So thank you so much for that. At this point, and with that idea of space, I am mindful that we're human beings, and right now we might need a space. And so we're giving a 2-minute space where you can sit on the screen and just, whew, that's a lot. We've been talking about a lot, and relax, or you might want to take a bio break. Or what I'm curious about doing is how we animate this particular space as a community engaged space, the Zoom space. I'm curious about, for those who want to participate, everyone, a word that describes how you're feeling at this moment, in this time, in this particular space. And our hope is maybe at the end we do a community engaged practice where we create together, and we invite you to come onto the video together, and we'll have text and language that Tom mentioned earlier as well. So you can also leave that in the chat, a chat for everyone about something, a word, the way you might be feeling at this particular moment. And because Charles is a poet, Charles will take all those things and he will make a poem that'll be part of our community engaged practice.
Thank you, Kevin.
Welcome back. I'm gonna wait for my co-host, Charles Smith, to come back, who moderates the chat room. Thank you everyone who has contributed your thoughts to the general chat space. I just put Charles on the spot, and so that a community must be reflexive in the moments. That's what we've been hearing along the way as well. And so Charles has the task, hopefully, of pulling all those into a poem of sorts, a vocal representation of everybody's contributions to being here and listening. And we hopefully at the end will find some time to create together. That's what community does. It's an experience. It should be an experience. And I'm I'm so energized. I've always, thanks to my experience at the Dance Exchange, changed my practice from being solely what I would call one gear on performing in a sort of theater-based space to really looking at how everyone arrives in my practice, how a community is built from the studio to an audience, to a performance, to actually researching in communities, working in communities, and honoring the many histories, as Matthew also mentioned in that. And that requires, as Tom mentioned, a really astute sensibility of space. One in which you're able to acknowledge the learnings that are happening in space, the ways in you're thinking about space, and the ways in which you're actually empowering the space and the participants in the space to leave feeling, as I see someone says here, enriched, to leave grounded, to leave tingly and hopeful with the sanguine nature that the passions that we hold for the art making and for community will be understood and differently in our artistic practice. We hear so much about the diversity in ways in which people are working in community and how that could be understood contextually. We hear so much about the ways in which queer arts practice or meeting community arts practice. And we often hear of the intergenerational conversations all the way through. At this point, I am excited to now invite Dequan to speak about his work in community and how he also experiences it as someone who primarily uses hip hop as a language for communication.
Hello, everyone. Dequan Clarke. I hope everyone's having a really good Thursday. I almost forgot what day it was. This time is really interesting, and I feel like it's you kind of it's interesting to kind of see how aware of yourself you are, while also figuring out how aware of the world you're in, like the spaces that you're in.
Dequan, 1 second. Do you mind just tilting your camera up a little bit? So
yes.
For those who could not make it on and will be participating online
yes.
later. Thank you.
Okay, is this me? Can you see me now? Good. So yes, I'm Dequan. I am a very, very, I'd say, enthusiastic dancer, artist. I love hip hop. I'm of Jamaican descent also, as my friend Kevin. So growing up in Scarborough, Ontario, I was able to be surrounded by a lot of cultures. I grew up, if you know Toronto, I grew up in Markham, Eglinton. So knowing that area, for a lot of people, it could be seen as a very dangerous area. Or it can be seen as a very strong community. I've seen both sides growing up, and I've learned a lot of of things that I think if I grew up in any other area, I just wouldn't be able to see and wouldn't be able to experience. Hip hop was something that kind of came to me. I grew up watching music videos, you know, really enjoying the sights and the sounds of what I saw on like BET growing up. Michael Jackson was my inspiration. Also Usher. I've been told that I've looked like Usher my whole life. So you can disagree if you want, but I've been told otherwise. So I think those things kind of really shaped me and my being. So a little thing. I went to high school in Gilwood, not too far from my intersection, which is a predominantly white neighborhood. But a lot of the neighboring places and where the students came from were the inner cities, basically. So Gilwood is a very gated community, and then there's like little communities and neighborhoods, hoods, you know, as you say, and that were around it. So I think being able to experience that and asking myself the question of why are communities so close, literally a 5 to 10 minute bus ride away, and why are they so different at the same time? And I think for me, that was really eye-opening growing up. Some of the things that I was able to experience, I realized a lot of my white friends growing up did not experience. I think being in spaces continuously growing up, I kind of understood more and more, I wouldn't say my place in this world, but where I am and how I navigated my experience as a Black man. Sorry, it's King Street. I'm on King Street right now, and there's trains behind me too. So if you hear a train, it's go. But I think I experienced those things. It was really interesting for me. It was hard. I wasn't always able to make ends meet growing up. But I had a good support system in terms of friends that came up with me that understood what I was doing, understood my love for the arts more, and supported me through that. And again, same as Tamla was saying, I had family growing up in a Caribbean household. There was hardly a difference between art like practices and just being of that culture and being immersed in that culture. So dancing almost kind of felt second nature. Like it was just something it was something that I was around a lot. Understanding more about my Jamaican side, my father, who passed away when I was younger, he was of Maroon descent, and understanding more and more of my Maroon side and my mom experiencing and telling me, you know, those stories and how I kind of came about that. I always found really interesting, and understanding that it was my people that kind of overturned the Spanish government and then helped Jamaica, you know, gain some independence. I was always really proud of that. I'm proud of my Jamaican heritage. And yeah, growing up in high school, as I was saying, I was able to experience Unity Charity. Unity Charity is a nonprofit organization that comes into high schools, elementary schools, and they show these kids hip hop, how to connect with hip hop, how to express themselves through arts, through movement, through graffiti, through DJing. And for me, obviously, I was connected to the dance side of things. And since then, I've been working with this organization for under a decade now. This summer, I've been in training to be official member of the team. I've kind of been working with the organization for some time, but now I'm more so like on payroll, continued payroll now. And it's been a really eye-opening experience because there's a lot of things that I have been able to see now as I'm growing into this role. And I'm just really grateful. I know that for me, as growing up, I knew that it was important to me to have a support system, or else I don't know where I would have been in terms of not only the neighborhood that I was with, but a lot of things that me as a Black man I'd experienced. I didn't know if I'd be able to, hold a workshop of youth in a school. I didn't know if I'd be able to engage in showcases to women, middle-aged women writing about blogs, talking about, their experiences, and just different spaces that I was able to be a part of that I wouldn't have had the opportunity if I hadn't engaged with the Unity for so long. And I think that's really helped. It's a beautiful organization. Michael Proserman was the founder. Rebecca Harrison is the director now. Amazing group of people. I have felt the most support from that organization. I really, I advise you guys to really check them out and see. They do projects all around Canada, but because of COVID, things have kind of slowed down, obviously, but they've been doing a lot of stuff on IG, which is really helpful. And yeah, so also, I am also part of Losses Found. Losses Found is a collective group. We're very multiple disciplinary. We do DJing, dancing, spoken word, whole lot of stuff. Really, really cool. And since COVID, I've been hosting improv sessions. So dancing, improv, playing music. I'd play music. I'll be in my living room, moving around, and just as you call in, you can videotape in, and we have the split screen. So then I play the music and then someone else moves. I just wanted it to be something that I could connect with people with, and to help people kind of really navigate this time. It was so fresh and so new to everyone. Everyone was kind of adjusting, and as an artist, obviously we know that a lot of our work was cut down almost immediately because of the requirements. And I just wanted to connect with everyone. And I think I am, I'd say an extrovert, but I'm also very much an introvert. So I was fine with not seeing a lot of people, like not having to go out, not having to, do all of this stuff. Because anyone knows me knows that I'll see you when I see you. If I see you, it's all love. But if I don't, I'll see you soon. But I really had no problem with not seeing people, but I still wanted to feel connected and still wanted to have a sense of community with the people that that I enjoy spending time with and that I enjoy connecting with. And I think that's also helped me connect with a lot more people outside of the city that I wouldn't, necessarily be able to connect with then, because I'm holding on IG and having those lives really helped connect with people, people in the States, friends in different cities in the country too. So that's really helped. And yeah, I think right now I've just kind of, I've been taking my time and just really understanding how to navigate this world right now. Being a Black man during COVID has been very hard. Opening my phone to visuals, to stories, to really eye-opening and heart-wrenching things on a daily basis has really been tough. And trying to feel connected but also disconnected from all of that it's a weird thing to be a part of. And it sucks that this world can be so dark, but I think the beautiful thing about being an artist in this time is trying to overcome that and trying to understand how to navigate and where your energy lies, and how to kind of help that internal feeling of consumption, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. I will lead out with the first question, and this is a space now where we're going to take questions for Dequan. Dequan, my question is: over your years working with Unity Charities, what have you learned about the ways in which hip hop galvanizes people in a community and/or thinks about community differently in context to other, let's say, arts practices?
Well, everything about hip hop has been community. That's the whole reason why it is what it is. It was made and created by DJ Kool Herc in that basement in Bronx. It was a house party, and everything from the Black people in the Bronx to the Puerto Rican people in the Bronx, that was community. Those were gatherings that were happening, night to night, weekly, and the whole basis of hip hop has been community. You can't have hip hop without community, and that's the bottom line. And I think that's something that Unity instills in all of its artists, to really understand that and recognize that those things are synonymous with each other. You can't say one cannot be well the other, so yeah.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Dequan at this time?
Yeah, there's one, and this could be asked, thought of, the other panelists can think of this as well. How can we shift the perception that currently quantitative inclusion of minority artists is an appropriate way to track the effectiveness of programming proposals? I guess, yeah, I think you got it.
Say it one more time. Say it one more time.
Sorry, to find it again.
Yeah.
Here we go. How can we shift the perception that currently the quantitative inclusion of minority artists is an appropriate way to track the effectiveness of programming proposals? So you may know that what happens is that arts councils tend to want to know how many people of color, indigenous people, And so I guess the person's saying, is that really a way to assess the effectiveness of an application?
I think it's so tough because representation is key. Again, I think like Tom was saying, you want to see people that look like you, that feel the way that you do, that people see yourself in the people that you're around. And I think these grants, they're hard to come by. They're hard to navigate if you don't have the right networks or the sources. And I think really breaking down those boundaries and really understanding how can I get these grants to youth that are looking to create. How do I educate them on accumulating money, or how do you educate them more on how to navigate these languages, these financial languages of this is what you put your money into, and this is how you connect with the community that you're a part of. That education is really key, and I think just really trying to do more of that, and really, I don't know, like just to broaden the horizon, you know what I mean?
Well, let me make it a bit more concrete. So we would have organizations that do not necessarily reflect who we are and the people we're talking today. and yet they'll put in applications where, let's say, what they're putting on stage doesn't change, but they may bring in a black body, a brown body, an indigenous body to play traditional roles. Is that good?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think connecting, I think showing those people that they shouldn't have to change based on what is required. Showing them that we can be in these spaces, that we can hold these spaces, no matter how we look, just obviously based on our talents and what we have to offer in our stories. I think that's important.
And there's one more. What have you found out about yourself this time around?
I think my strength. I think a lot of my strength. I've been trying to also, I'm trying to also navigate my faith right now. These are dark times. And I think really taking a step back and saying, okay, who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? What do I have energy for today? And just understanding how strong you are, and what you can, what's your intake saying today? Yeah, it's just mental strength for me, mental strength, a lot of mental strength.
Thank you, Dequan. I think someone who could speak to all these particular aspects of the questions also being asked, from granting to the precarities, to the ways of acknowledging diversity and representation and community arts practice, and so on and so on and so on, is up next. And that is Ruth Howard, who has been a community animator, activator in so many ways, and could speak to the many contexts of also how, through her organization, Jumbli's Theater, she thinks about quantitative or qualitative representation in community arts engagements and practices.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, all of you. And lovely fellow panelists. And it's funny to be speaking to an audience who we can't see, but hi out there, people. Very good of you to be here on a sunny afternoon to partake of all this. So I'm just looking at the, yeah, let me keep an eye on the time. I didn't plan what I was going to say because I wanted to hear what people were going to say and respond and not repeat. And I can concur heartfeltly with a lot of things that people have said so far. But I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, inspired by others in a way that I don't always about a few things that are kind of on my mind, that I'm thinking about nowadays that I haven't actually put into words and shared publicly yet. So I can take a bit of a chance on those two things. And yeah, so I'm an interdisciplinary theater and visual artist with a community engaged arts practice, and the founder and artistic director of Jumbli's Theater and Arts, we're calling it, to embrace that interdisciplinarity. And we're coming up for our 20th year as incorporated, and that's a company that I founded 20 years ago to sort of support work I'd been doing for quite a few decades before that with other partners and as an independent artist. So I learned on the job to run a company in order to be able to do the art and share the art that I felt was important and wanted happening in the place where I lived. We and I also do a lot of so Jumblies and my work. We bring together artists of all sorts, fairly broadly defined people with creative practices with people of all sorts, and to create art that is exciting and meaningful and comes out of those combinations of people and places. Also a lot of nowadays, actually over the years, and now a lot of mentoring and supporting of other artists and other organizations and other projects, including helping write grants and navigate the granting system. Just saying, if as someone who's learned on the job, like helping other people, proofreading, editing, just got good at it because I had to. So happy to share. Picking up on what Tamla said, which I liked about I find myself these days I find this to be a reflective time, and I find myself in a reflective mode with a lot of shifting grounds around me and us. And this is due to how things are shifting in our times, in our social political system, in good ways and bad ways. And the age in life, and on top of all that, COVID-19 times. So yeah, I'm a woman in my 60s, parent whose children have all moved out. I'm an immigrant from England. I'm a second-generation Jewish Holocaust survivor on my mother's side, and a light-skinned person. And in my upbringing, art was also very tightly woven through how I grew up for my whole life. Mostly a sort of Western European high arts, popular arts, but both as something that you did and something that you appreciated. So I experienced it as those things as a continuum, and that you did the things for fun, even if you weren't good at them. Like I did dance and I made music, and I still do those things, and I'm still not good at them, and I still love doing them. And then the ones that you were good at, you might get better at, and it might become your work, which is what happened with me in the area of visual arts and design and words and images, and people are really my form. I'm actually, I'm here, I'm sewing a giant community quilt through this conference, because for me, I pay attention and listen better if I'm doing. It's a bit like, Tom talking about moving with his body. I find my hands are occupied, I'll pay attention better. So out of that, all of that's, I'm not a neutral factor in my practice. All of that, who I am, has affected the work I've brought forward, and has given me a sort of mantra through my whole life of work I always come back to, which is the phrase, holding on and letting go, and sort of deciding which is what's worth holding on to, and what should be let go of at any point. And that's a constant thought process and part of that reflective mode. And that includes, community arts. What is it? It's the terms have changed, the sense of it's changed, and from, when I started, what I started working in when I was younger. Not to get into that, but just around the terms and the practice and the forms and the content. So I just wanted to, and for Jumblies, our projects at the moment, well, we do a lot of things. We have a big through project that is led now by our associate artist director, Ange Loft, which is called Talking Trees, which is now a big multi-indigenous project where, well, lots of wonderful things going on, publishing a treaty guide for Torontonians and with a website, and making a new film, and it's all going to be the Toronto Biennial of Art. But that, I support that. I'm in the background as needed, which allows me to do some other things where I can be the lead artist and step forward, and make space for that to take its own journey. And so a project I started pre-COVID is called Grounds for Goodness. And it's looking at artful ways that people or groups of people sometimes can behave in good ways towards other people or groups of people, counter to sometimes what we assume. And that theme bumped headlong into COVID-19, which is kind of a huge, big case study into human goodness and not goodness. So a lot to think of there. And I wanted to just, so thinking about going into COVID time and also reflective mode in general, three things in the work that for me are important to hold on to as we, virtual, real life, in whatever spaces we're in. And the first one is, actually the first one is the quality of the art making and the caring that the art is, that is serious practice. Doesn't mean it's not fun, doesn't mean it has to be, virtuosic, but the art is, it's a primary practice where we're seriously making art that's striving to be compelling and exciting as much as ever any art ever is. And that I would bring with me wherever, whether I'm working on a computer screen or in a field or in a studio or, sitting alone in my home. So that's one. And I guess the, yeah, and so in virtual times, that there's interesting implications of that because the aesthetics change. But like probably a lot of you, I've just, we've discovered it with Jumblies that there are exciting ways to the limitations of COVID and your screen and how you move in it and where the depth is and color. And, I can put an object right up to my screen and it's suddenly all orange. And if we all do that, we've created a patchwork of color. So, fun things so that's the one. Number two is the assertion that everyone's welcome, the importance of including everybody and not leaving anyone out and constantly questioning that, which is, is a lifelong challenge, but at the heart of the work to me. And in real life, that means, often for us, paying for taxis, driving people, giving healthy food, having personal care workers, thinking about how our space is arranged for access and so on, and hiring buses sometimes, hiring companions, a lot of things which, are costly in resources and we put into our budget. In COVID times, that's translated to what people have mentioned before, who has access to technology, who can afford it. So all that participant support now has gone into, and we've been lucky to, apply for and get some funding from this. This is what we do. Buying tablets and devices for people, paying for their data sticks, paying for their internet, giving coaching sessions, one-on-one in group. Yeah, so because it's partly affordability of technology and partly skills can be, or some people who don't have mobility, making sure they have a personal care worker with them to be able to navigate their computers. I know there's one person in our audience who's part of Jumblie's team who's been part of a huge effort to bring people into our virtual, trying to say everyone's welcome art making. And it's really been the younger people, a fantastic team of younger people who've been doing this and with success, but person by person, week by week, and tons of hours. So in a way, the thing to hold on to is including people and meaning it. It's always hard. And in other ways, as people have mentioned, someone who's really homebound or who's in another country or, can come to the activities now who couldn't before. So we also discover there's other kinds of, or somebody with a disability, that doesn't allow them to go out, or who's elderly, or who's lives way over on the other side of Toronto and they're elderly and they can't take the TTC. So there's different kinds of inclusion and, some of those are keepers. Moving forward, there's a lot to have learned. So that's number two. Everyone's welcome. And the number three, which I'll end with, is about, and this is really where, this is the thing that I'm thinking, is the thing, bringing people together. And for me, the community arts practice, what's always been really, like one of the things it does so well is introduces to people to each other who may have actual historical rifts or current rifts or prejudices against each other or power imbalances and into a space where they're doing something that doesn't put the focus on that rift or conflict, but allows a relationship to happen and trust and understanding to be built. And, as I say it, there's all but that also, I've seen it happen. And so I believe it can happen, and that's the strength of the work. And I also, and this is going back to my own a bit my own family background, I've always been very aware of the dangers of not doing that, of keeping people separate, like how that can lead all the way from distrust to biases to oppression to bullying to violence to genocide. So, you know, I have it's kind of, that's built into my bones actually too, is invite people to the party, invite everyone to the party, introduce them to each other. And I stand by that and I hold on to it. And but through our Grounds for Goodness project, I've started reading quite a lot about the history of social psychology and theories around group psychology. And, you know, well, I cannot say too much, but there's, you know, there's studies saying that yes, surprise, contact between groups there. I mean, surprise groups compete and form their own identities and approach each other. Also, you know, we wouldn't be community artists groups. Sorry, I lost my thread. Yes, groups who have some differences or concepts can be brought together. What?
1 second. That last minute that you were talking about social cohesiveness was not understood. You're breaking up on your side of the.
You lost me. Okay, I'm just gonna change my I changed my no. Hey, wait. I'm gonna change my can you hear me now? No?
It's still break. I'll give you
wait.
I'll give you a minute. So as Ruth adjusts that, there's some interesting points that she's mentioning here, which is around the idea of inclusivity and connectivity. Again, access, right? We hear that, you know, we connect to different spaces around the world, but as we should, we're interacting right now as she is in real time with the challenges of technologies. And what does it mean for community art engagement as we look at resources, as she mentioned?
Kevin, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I want to say one last sentence because it was the but, which is that there's another way of thinking about it, which is that it's important for people with common identities who've been oppressed and who are seeking equity and social justice to be together in safe spaces and not have to mingle with other groups, and to acknowledge the power dynamics. And this I also acknowledge and is also true. And so my thinking at the moment is, and yet I hold on to the other. I mean, how to hold on to those both those things in the work that we do. And for me, the other one is, you know, for my sort of social position and benefits and privilege, the bringing together is the thing I'm good at. And yet you know, the other is, it's also, the others kind of come into ascendancy in the community arts world. And as I say, not, you know, it's interesting. And so how to navigate that, and then to say in reflective mode, what do I hold on to? Is it time to step aside? Is it time to let go and let other people figure that one out? And so that's where I am as of today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. I was literally just making a comment about the challenges of accessibility and Wi-Fi and all these things that we hold dear in sometimes larger cities as it relates to doing community practice that is in more rural areas, as in the case of like Matthew or like Tom, and how in this time and coming out of COVID, we actually think about those things as we start to do community engaged work, and the ways in which it sometimes is the most important thing. So the most important things you mentioned there, and we'll open up for a couple questions, is this idea of how everyone should be welcome, and is there a framework for allowing everybody to feel welcome in space? But the next part of that is the resources that it takes to actually undertake a community engaged work. And I want to say thank you for that, because I do believe it takes sometimes a lot more resources to figure out the tokens and figure out the food and figure out things that sometimes we don't think about in the other aspect of on the other side of the work. Because you have a contract, you come in to a studio and you just execute work. So, you know, going back again and connecting the idea about what was mentioned earlier when the question about grants and funding is, how can we consider in this particular reality now, coming out of COVID, the need to have more resources given to community engaged arts practices? We'll go on. At this moment in point around access and resources and inclusion, I'd like to welcome Samson Brown, who's a theater artist and in many ways decenters the reality of what it means to be African, what it means to be along a gender spectrum, but more importantly, actually uses the theater spectrum, the theater,
I think,
as a way to address all these the complexities of identity and as it relates to artistic making.
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Samson Bonkeabantu Brown. I am a traditional healer. I am a sangoma. I am an artist. I am a trans man. I am also an advocate for the trans community and the other intersections that make up who I am. So first off, I actually want to thank everybody, one, for being here and taking part, and two, for the people who have added in their pronouns into their name, which is actually quite helpful. So I really appreciate that. So community engagement, art practice, my story, my journey, my art, my everything. So I work in theater. That is my medium. That is my love. That is what I do. It's actually all I ever wanted to do. More specifically, all I ever wanted to do was act. I didn't have a backup plan. There was no plan B. I only had a plan A. And that started at childhood, with my first taking classes at Young People's Theater, here where I live, in Takaranto on Turtle Island. So that was my first bit of a taste, and that was from as young as 7. But in a recent conversation with my mother, who, bless everybody for having different memories of the same experience in the same period of time, because things that I don't remember, she remembers. Things that she doesn't remember, I remember, which is a beautiful gift. But she told me that I actually started out as a writer before I even started out acting, which I didn't recall any of that. I thought the writing actually came after, but apparently it didn't. So I have been a poet, a playwright, and then, and I should say also a poet, playwright, and singer, and then an actor. But acting was what I thought and I felt was my love and my heart and my drive and all I really wanted to do. And that inspiration came because for my mother, who is a South African woman, immigrant to Canada, she has always, and she had always been impressed upon me the importance of education. And for a woman to impress upon her child the importance of education and yet inform her child that at one point in her post-secondary education that she chose to schedule all of her classes around a soap opera, I found it very, very interesting that one show, Young and the Restless to be specific, could mean so much that she would change and shift her relationship to her own education around a show. So that taught me the importance and the power of art. So that kind of funneled where I was at. And I said, if my mom can think like that, then I want to be that important and I want to be involved in something that big that I can shift the way people are thinking. So that led into further classes, taking part in acting in school, etc., drama classes, whatnot, what have you. And then I hit a period where I was part of a youth theater program called the Act Out Project, and that was at a Boys and Girls Club here in Toronto called St. Albans Boys and Girls Club. So this specific theater project brought together a bunch of Black and POC youth from around the city who were from different marginalized neighborhoods and what the city would consider at-risk youth. So some of us were at that time involved in gangs, X, Y, and Z. So it was a way to kind of get us out of that. And so the Boys and Girls Club was in a neutral zone, which was a beautiful thing because I actually got to engage with people I probably otherwise wouldn't have. But so I joined that show, and the character I was playing, and this was before I actually started to transition, but it was my first real affirmation of my gender, was that I played a undercover gay guy. Now, mind you, that's not necessarily my sexuality, but the fact that I played a man when at the time the world saw me as a girl really, really meant a lot to me. So I kind of, and it's interesting, every single theater show that I've done and every part that I've played, except for one show that I've been in, well, now technically kind of two, I have always been affirmed, and my gender has always been affirmed, so I've always played men. So I did that for a while off and on, and then I took a break, did life, experienced life, before joining the cast of Secrets of a Black Boy in 2009, which was a show that was being done through Trey Anthony's production company at that time, and written by her brother Darren Anthony. And so I joined that cast, and then I did that show from 2009 until, I want to say 2015, 2016, off and on, touring with that show. But in 2015, I started as an artist in residence at Wata Theater Company under Debbie Young, Anita Africa. And for anybody that knows Debbie Young's work, you should know that Debbie Young is a monodramatist, and is absolutely brilliant and pulls so much out of people and encourages people to look so deep within themselves and shift the ways that we maneuver in our art, in our lives, in our relationships, and to ourselves. So I was trained and mentored by Debbie, and it was at Wata that I wrote what I thought was was my first ever show, called 1111, which at that time was titled 1111, a monodrama in 7D. So I performed that in installments in different iterations. So in that show, it was a one-person show. It was just me on stage, and I played 6 characters, also played instruments and tap danced on stage, plus sang. And at that time, I was also discovering sounds and how to make music and music production and sound production. So I incorporated that work also into the show. And then I got into stage managing, whatnot, what have you. And then last year, I guess you could say remounted, but started reworking 1111 and premiered that at Riser Project, which is a theater event that happens here in Takaranto at the Theater Center through Why Not Theater. And so they provide a platform for artists, emerging and otherwise, to present their work in spaces and times when oftentimes we might not be able to do that. So that was a beautiful experience for me to be able to do that. And again, that show, I played roughly 8 characters, again, singing, dancing, not playing any instruments this time, but still working through things. And for me, in my practice, the core of my practice, interestingly enough, as I've only ever had a plan A, I realized very quickly that A actually meant ancestors. So my plan has always been my ancestors without me even realizing. My ancestors have always informed my work. They've informed my life. They've informed my journey. They've informed everything. And so my show, 1111, is about a trans child who is struggling to, one, come out to their family due to fear, and also to navigate their relationship with their ancestors who are saturating the main character's dreams. And so I had about a 2 to 3 week run with that show. And now the show, I've been in talks with another theater company here that is interested in remounting the show. So a beautiful blessing. And my ancestors continue to open doors and make ways for me to do the things that I need to do. in order for me to create art and to fulfill my purpose. And part of my purpose is to create art. The other part of my purpose is to teach. And the third part of my purpose is to heal. And I do all three of those through my art. And also through my role as a traditional healer, as a spiritual healer, as a Sangoma, which is a South African diviner. So that's kind of where I'm at. And what is it like being all of these things and doing all of these things during COVID? Interestingly enough, I came back from South Africa and from training and from initiation into being a Sangoma. I came back from South Africa at the beginning of February, jumped right into rehearsals for a show, completely jet lagged, but ran a 2 weeks run of a show. And then once we closed that show on March 8th, COVID hit and everybody had to stay home, which kind of works for me because I'm very much an introvert and I have no problem being in my house. I like being with myself because it also gives me more time to be with my ancestors. So I'm always good with that, right? It gives me a chance to figure out who I am and what else I need to heal and where I need to grow and what I need to shift through. But I realized that during this time, because I write my own plays and because I act in my own plays, I'm gifted with an opportunity to be able to do what it is that I always do, which is write, which blessedly I'm able to do anywhere, which I think is a real big gift. And so it's just right now, a lot of meetings, zooming my life away, I guess you could say, in meeting after meeting after meeting, but also figuring out another show that my ancestors want me to write and another story that they want me to tell. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I have a question. If you're okay with this question, I hope you are, because I want to just tease this idea as well before I go into our last speaker, which they say you save the best for last. You'll see why I think I've saved the best for last. For you, Samson, the question I'd have for you is, what are some of the challenges or bump up that you've had as a trans man, as an artist, working in theater or working in the performing arts, that really you might want to amplify in this particular space around queer arts practices, and what does it mean to actualize your artistic practice and yourself in this particular way?
I think the biggest issue, or bump, I guess, that I've come across, or at the time I thought was the biggest bump or issue that I came across, was that when I came out as trans, I came out to the cast of Secrets of a Black Boy in a closed rehearsal. It wound up being spoken about, I guess, in the process of marketing with people at a newspaper. And then an article and an interest was had around my being trans and how that was received in a cast of Black men, and the fact that it was received well. But so it's how my mother found out. It's how my entire family found out. At that time, my mother was living in South Africa and I was living here. And then I wound up managing to get an agent, and somebody shared the article with the agent without my consent, without letting me know that they were going to. And actually, when I spoke to my agent at the time, he informed me that it was not shared it was shared in a way to warn him as to whether or not that's really what he wanted to do, was to represent me as a trans person, and what that could possibly mean. Because at that time in 2009, especially here in Toronto, there weren't really any out Black trans men as actors. Somebody actually mentioned to me that they think I was actually the first in Canada, which I'm not 100% sure if that's true, but that's what somebody informed me. And shortly after that, my agent stopped working. He just stopped doing anything for me. I haven't had representation since. I kind of had to figure out everything on my own. It's been an interesting time how to be okay with who I am when everybody else is finding ways to close doors. So it's just that push and that pull. But blessedly, in one of my many conversations with my ancestors of how to get over that anger, I was presented with the reality that it was actually a gift. Because the reality was that nobody else can represent me better than me. I am the only one who can represent me properly. And at a time when there was very little education, did I want to spend the majority of my time educating agents, educating casting people, educating directors, educating about my experience and my reality of my life and everything else? Or did I want to just create art, be present, represent for the trans community, and then educate and assist and mentor other young trans men, or even older sometimes trans men, on starting their journey to themselves? So that was kind of, yeah. So that was like, it was a challenge, yet at the same time, a gift, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Is there any questions, Charles? No questions.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you. And the idea of consent when you're working in communities is such an important thing that sometimes we often not understood contextually as practitioners working in community spaces. And the idea of also then working through the sort of subject matter that we might be working in different communities that might be traumatic or might need some holding and some support is also something that I hear just coming up here. But also the idea of like having a consideration for therapy for supporters who work in these particular ways when working community engaged art, especially when working with marginalized, racialized communities and or LGBTQ2+ communities is so important. And that's why I said I saved the best for last. Because in all those particular relationships and considerations, I want to bring to the conversation as our last speaker, Michael Patrick Porter, who works for Access Alliance and does a lot of support therapy work, but also is also an artist and creator and work in production in the music theater field. So without further ado, our last speaker will be William.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Kevin, for putting me on the spot like that. I first just want to say that for me, like little old me, I'm in the company of giants in terms of the work and folks that are in Toronto and everything that your reputations precede you. So I'm very, very happy to be here. As I said, I'm also in Toronto, so a beneficiary of Treaty 13 and an uneven beneficiary of that. I also grew up in the western door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, so Tuscarora and Seneca Nation, in what most people would know as Buffalo. And it's not the focus of this talk to talk about what that reciprocity means, but I think it's important to recognize where I've benefited disproportionately. In that kind of small me space of being a kid, I have a lot of moms, and 3 of my moms when I was little were all artists. And whether it was acting, sculpture, or a number of other methods of art, they all showed me at an early age that art can be a tool for trauma recovery. It can be a tool for processing. It can be a tool for like prevention, kind of in a way, for other folks in your community. And when I was little, I started to see, particularly in theater spaces, representations of people who I just had that connecting vibe with it at the time, didn't know was queerness or didn't know that was any kind of connection further than that, but I could start to see myself. And I started to understand that in art and in theater spaces, there was a different degree of safety, not complete safety, but some degree of safety that was different from general community spaces. Buffalo is, from my experience, is a pretty queer space. And I was lucky to have a lot of very strong queer people in my childhood. And in my teen years, I moved to Ohio, which was a big flip, moving to Cleveland. And I kind of shifted that arts understanding just as kind of a possibility for processing to like art as survival, as this creation, like the act of creation needs to, it's like an evolutionary tool that humans have to keep us alive. And I experienced art through photography, which for me was kind of processing. At that time, it was still dark rooms and, you know, stabbing around in the darkness with a can opener to deal with that kind of stuff. It was musicals, which felt like rhythm and like unity in purpose, and also dance and movement work, which for queer folks, and my experience, it's hard for me to take up space and to also get out of my body, which was helpful with movement. And in kind of, I guess, my young adult years, I started to do creative nonfiction, and that was a process of decolonizing how I approached all of these things. Now as Kevin said, I'm mostly working in mental health and the problematically named settlement field, which really just means you're supporting newcomers, whatever their status or non-status, and also focusing on supporting refugees. And in my role, I'm a community health worker in the LGBTQ2+ newcomer program at Access Alliance. So all of these things kind of come together for me. I spent 8 years working as a sound designer and then doing some freelance work. And in those arts spaces, I was often doing some mental health work already. I mean, we all know the experiences of precarity and contracts and shows that get dropped. And I think that was a benefit for me in touring settings and in festival settings, was having kind of having through other experiences had the ability to like sit with discomfort. And it was also a time where I started to realize that my negative experiences as a queer non-binary person in Ohio were kind of globally connected. There's the evangelical religious right in the Midwest is the same funders of that same violence in nations like Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. There's strong collaborations across that. And so all of these things are sort of coming together for me. And I was also in a place where I was still kind of regurgitating, like I don't want to mix up with performance, but like regurgitating the ways of being that we're all kind of taught and forced into. And I wanted to reconnect with that kind of performance and art as survival piece. In the space that I work now at Access Alliance, and I also worked at another settlement agency previously, there's a lot of folks who are in that fight, flight, or freeze space, which is a result, no fault of our own, of traumatic experiences. And our brains can get like locked into it. I'm not going to dork out on the science of that, but our brains can get locked in those patterns. And we can lose all that information that comes through our bodies and our environment when our brain is working in that way. And as a placement student in 2018, I met Kevin and Charles and Rodney, and they were through Wind in the Leaves Collective, and they were running a kind of a pilot workshop. So predominantly refugee newcomers were doing creative writing pieces. They were making movement pieces. They were collaborating on what I would say is like poetry and script writing. And then they created 2 separate pieces that they brought to the drop-in group, which is a weekly group of pre-COVID times at like 50 to 80 drop-ins. People would drop in every week, and about 300 registered folks. And and now that's different. You do the Zoom thing, but we're trying to blend those things back together. But it's a really strong community, and in that process, I think it was maybe what I would call the intermission of the show. A client came up, was just walking by, and I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he looked me dead in the face and he said, "I feel like I'm from Hollywood." And his whole body changed. Like it was just like he grew in front of me, physically, just with like, this is my space. This is where I get to be. I'm owning my body and people are celebrating me. And so there's that program is coming back within the context of like having a little extra funding and doing all of that work. So I'm very excited about that and kind of figuring out, as many people have talked about, like what field are we going to dance in? What space are we going to be in? How do we make this happen safely? But I also just, for me, the kind of mental health structure and what in counseling work is often called expressive arts, and it's just arts, you know, it's a different tool. Sometimes mental health can be an assimilation process. Sometimes it's about defining our emotions or quantifying them in particular ways. And I've had a really hard time with that work because I think it's harmful to meet someone at a very vulnerable moment and then tell them they need to take on a particular worldview to get better. And expressive arts is whatever medium that's in, is a place where people can express their own systems and their own knowings, and there isn't this demand that most newcomers have in every other aspect of their life, specifically in Canada, which is that xenophobic and often racist terminology around Canadian experience. Like, can you model what we do, you know, what we do? And that goes back to me about that. To me, that goes back to that kind of like regurgitating. It's not performance. It's like it's a cage. Like if somebody runs up on me in the middle of the night, I perform my elder brother, right? Because I'm very this, but that I know will stop people in their tracks, but it doesn't feel good. But when I'm in a space where I'm expressing what I know to be, how I want to be and how I know myself, that's freeing and that's performance, and that's I think it's essential, and it's going to be needed more when we start to eke our way out of this time, because I think something that for me just hasn't hit as hard as I think it will is the immense loss of humans, of creativity, of these powerful beings that are gone now. And we're going to learn about that as we get close together again. What people have been individually struggling with. Like we're all kind of trying to be productive, and I think people are masking a lot of that grief and sorrow and loss. And so as somebody said in another, I can't take credit for this, but they said, we know this stuff works. And so as these spaces open back up, we need to scream loud about what we know, that we know that this works. We know that this is powerful, and we know that it'll change everything if we can center this kind of work. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you so much. We know that if we do this type of work, it will center everybody in the communities, in society, to think how we actually are dealing with this moment that we're in, but also, as you mentioned, the moments we come out of. So I want to thank you for that. I don't have any questions. Is there any questions coming up? None. Okay, great. So I want to just echo some things that William has mentioned, which is this idea of like the community. Yes. Any?
No.
No questions. That community arts engagement really emerges as a catalyst for us and in society to really make sense of the time we're in. the time we will be coming into, and that the arts as a moment of unlocking not just the trauma, but the potential of what we do in our community, in our communities, is literally at the space of engagement. It's engagement with respect, it's engagement with actually understanding how people are arriving into the space. And more importantly, allowing everybody to feel close to something again. And that might be just creating meaning in that particular space. I wonder if we could use this particular moment to start creating that meaning. As I mentioned in the chat, we hopefully are going into a practice now that I'm always excited about. And it's the way in which we use, recap the stories, the moments, the words in this act of community sharing. I wonder if Matthew would co-facilitate with me as we create for the next little while, if there are no questions that are arriving, a moment of sharing and together in space. What would that look like? It might invite, I would also invite everybody where possible to join us in video. So we can see, as Newton mentioned, everybody moving in space and time. And really, this is the moment for us to see you and to be with you in space as we create another moment, another catalyst together. Thank you all. Everybody's doing it. We've created a safe space. Thank you, everyone. Matthew, do you want to go first?
Hold on, before you do that, Kevin, if I may just say, so when you turn on your video to participate, we understand that to mean that you are okay with us broadcasting it. In other words, you're giving us permission when we reissue this for you to be on it. Okay? So if you're not comfortable with that, don't turn on your camera. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for that. I'm also acknowledging that when you received a confirmation that there was a sort of release that was a part of the confirmation event, right, that indicated that we'd be putting this particular on for everybody who couldn't make it on social media in terms of on YouTube, so that way it can be seen and during this time and in this particular moment. I see beautiful faces that I know, and I'll toss it to Matthew and he'll toss it back to me and we'll create together.
Beautiful. Hi, everybody. Hi again. Thank you, everybody, for such rich dialogue and so much to think about today. It's been a real treat to be here. And like Kevin mentioned, one of the ways that at least I know myself and Kevin are both often listening is not just for the words and ideas that are striking, but also the movement that's within those words and ideas, and how those ideas and words move our bodies as we're telling those stories. Sometimes we can't help but move when we start talking about the things we feel passionate about and excited about. So I want to reflect back a few things that really struck me, and I invite you to join me in that. And I want to start, I actually want to go all the way back to something that Tamla said early on in our time together. And that was this relationship between arts and community, and for her, those being synonymous. And so one of the things that I thought about was just kind of like these two tracks going side by side, synonymous. So can we bring one finger up for that arts and one finger up for that community, and acknowledging that they move forward together synonymously. From here, Tamla, you talked about this like delineation and how sometimes, depending on the space you're in and who you're around, there's a delineation between arts and community. And when you did that, you actually brought your hands just like this in front of your body, one on top of the other, like so. But for you, that arts is like in and around your life all the time, and it's a kind of a love of all things. And when you did that, the hands went from this really kind of clear space together right in front of you. They kind of stirred the space right in front of you. So arts all around you, like beautiful, yeah. So let's go back. How does our dance begin? We've got one finger for arts and one finger for community, knowing that those are synonymous for Tamla, and I get the sense for lots of us. From here, we're going to come back to that delineation. Sometimes people ask us to separate them and to tease them out, but we know for us on this call that it's actually the mixing of all that. That's really exciting. From here, I want to come, I'm going to borrow a movement actually from the piece that Tom and I are making, at least as of right now. Tom, you talked about igniting queerness as like something that you are excited about and how that like shows up in your work. And what I thought of was a movement that you already have where, so I'm gonna invite us to bring our thumb up. And we're gonna, almost like it made me think of like a lighter, right? And how you like light that lighter. And so we're gonna light that lighter by grabbing that thumb. And then we're gonna bring it, like we're gonna ignite it by giving voice to it. And when we do that, we're gonna bring it to our mouth, and then our other fingers are gonna light up. Beautiful, beautiful. Here, I'm actually gonna pass it to Kevin.
Thank you. One thing that I heard in Samson's story and also in Tom's gesture was this notion of being closed out. And I thought it was a really beautiful moment of thinking about how one sense, if we close off one sense, how it amplifies the other sense. We've been listening a lot for 3 hours and it has meant so much. So we're taking something that was also a negative, but making it also positive. And so we're really taking here, and we find a breath, we just say like we do a 2 count here. And then we're gonna literally think about what he did also, which is the idea of like crossing our hands on both hands joining at one side, and then just opening up. So again, going from where Matthew ended, we're gonna just cover, take a moment here, and then we cross the left arm, in my case, onto the right, and we open up. What's really beautiful also in Ruth's conversation was the ways in which she considered her intersectionalities. And so for me, I'm gonna take the many identities and things that we actually take into communities, as I mentioned. I'm gonna find the ways to connect those 2 things together. And there, I'm gonna just throw it to one of the speakers if they are also willing to contribute or share a movement. But let's go back.
Beautiful, yep. So how does our dance begin? We're gonna go all the way back. We have 1 finger for art, 1 finger for community, finding that synonymous track forward. From there, we're gonna bring that back in close and find that delineation that some people ask us for, knowing that we wanna mix all of that up. We're gonna find that lighter and we're gonna ignite whatever part of ourselves we want to ignite from this conversation. From here, we're gonna bring that hand over the eyes. Take a moment to breathe and journey into yourself. And then bring that other hand up. We're gonna open ourselves up in the ways that this conversation has opened us up, and then find all the ways that that can then integrate and intersect with what we wanna carry forward. Kevin, you are muted. Do you wanna close us out, my dear?
Yes, I'd like to close this out by actually having one of the participants on the call. And there's 2, how do we do this where there's like 2 different, anyone I see first who wants to contribute, raise a hand, put a hand up, and we'll honor you in this space as a participant for the last gesture movement. And Charles will actually be saying words, the words that we created as we do this. And I'll have some background music to go with it as well. Is there any one of the participants who want to share with us a particular gesture or movement? And I'm going between 2 screens.
Newton's raising their hand.
Very simple gestures, but goes back to Africa. So it's a gesture that you can come from the hand up, and you bring it to the softest spot of your brain, and it's called your Eleda. And your Eleda is where your God manifests on yourself. So you're connecting yourself with the universe and connecting to the earth, and then your feet touch the ground and goes to the magna. So in a way, we are connecting with the Orishas, and also in my own personal life, I'm connecting with my mentor, connecting with the universe, yourself as a human being, and the ground and the center of the earth.
Great, thank you. And we're 5 minutes away, so we should practice. I will put some music on. It will challenge Charles to think differently about the rhythm in the music, but it was mentioned by Dequan also when I honor the idea of music from different spaces. And I, as a Jamaican, I'm gonna use Kumina. If you're Jamaican from of the many ethnicities that exist in Jamaica, the 7 ethnicities, once any Jamaican hears that downbeat and that rhythm, they automatically find grounding, they find space. And I wanna use Kumina. And I'll invite Matthew to also lead us through the process.
Cool. I'll say that there's lots of really lovely and gorgeous variations already being made based on where you are in the space you're in. So I say follow that lead, lean into that desire and that curiosity, and make those variations. I'm going to keep my screen on gallery so I can also just watch all the beautiful dancing that's happening today. And I'll lead us, I'll kick us off, but I'm actually going to let my voice fall away so we can hear the music and hear the words that Charles has brought together for us. So Kevin, can we bring in some of that beautiful sound?
Sure. I am hopeful, enriched, restful, grounded. I am tingly, sanguine, at times overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed with joy, laughter, and the voices that pull me, that are pulling me today. In this place, I am invigorated, splitting away from old ways, reconnecting to who I am. I am willing to say what I'm feeling and am not afraid of this journey. I am connected.
Nice. And so that was with the poem. Now we invite you to do just the movement as well. And you have to get down tonight. So the grounded and the connection to the ancestor means that you have to find the ground. If you're sitting, put your feet on the floor and find where that place is. Animate your body and face. It's been a great 3 hours, and we're creating the catalyst of community arts, sensible to the many things that exist in the practice together. Here we go, from the top.
I am hopeful, enriched, restful, grounded. I am tingly, sanguine, at times overwhelmed. With joy, laughter, and the voices that pull me, that are pulling me today in this place. I am invigorated, splitting away from old ways, reconnecting to who I am. I am willing to say what I am feeling and am not afraid of this journey. I am connected.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for an amazing session. Thank you, Matthew, for co-facilitating this experience with me at the end. I want to thank all the speakers. We've amplified space. We've had conversations about where our sexual or artistic queer identities are also meeting community arts engagement. And we also have listened with intent, with a breadth that is required in this particular type of work. I want to say thank you. I want to also say, if you're curious about the other sessions we have coming up, it's free. You can just register online and you can join us. Follow SIPAMO at www.sipamo.org for the other sessions. The next one will be around visual arts representation and the problematics of looking at it from a Eurocentric lens, when visual arts in the African and IPOC experience is about many, many things coming together to have a conversation. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers. And I hope that the rest of your evening is as amplified and as beautiful and rich and connected and grounded as this session was. Enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.